Hello guys, it's me Simo Orahara, and in this video we'll talk about the reason why Zaraki didn't release his Bankai correctly by comparing it with the 8th Kenpachi's Bankai, as I find them similar in several things, including the mechanism of how each Bankai works. So to begin with, if we are familiar with the general concept of how to release the Shikai and the Bankai, we will find that Zaraki's release of the Bankai may seem illogical and not in line with what has been said about the Bankai and how it requires years of training in order for a Shinigami to be able to release it. Therefore, seeing that Zaraki knew the name of his Zanpakuto a few days ago and then releases the Shikai and then his Bankai might seem unacceptable, especially when we know that the hero of the story, Ichigo, needed a special machine in order to be able to learn Bankai in 3 days. So I still remember that when Zaraki released his Bankai for the first time, some people talked about these points. However, if we examine what happened, we will find that there are a few things that are overlooked regarding Zaraki's Bankai. The first is that he didn't actually release the Bankai. Zaraki still has not released the Bankai himself until now. But it can be said that the Bankai, which is Yachiru, is the one who released its power on her own without the will or control of Zaraki. The question that could be asked is why Yachiru was the one who was able to awaken Zaraki's power in the Bankai mode. And this is what I find among the similarities between Yachiru and Uruzakuro, Azashiro Soya's Bankai. We know that in order for the Shinigami to awaken the Shikai, he needs to know the name of his Zanpakuto and communicate with it within his inner world. And therefore, this method requires the Shinigami to be aware of the name of his Zanpakuto as well as to communicate with it. And one of the most prominent examples that we have seen is what happened between Ichigo and White. Osan, who is Ichigo's Quincy power, needed the real Zanpakuto in order to teach Ichigo the basics of Shikai. So he needed White. On the other hand, it can be said that Zaraki and Azashiro Soya got their Bankai without even passing through the Shikai stage. How is that? If we go back to the methods that makes a Shinigami able to activate the Bankai, we will find that one of the basic conditions is to take the Zanpakuto from the inner world to the outside. And this essential step requires years of training, but it seems that there are rare cases where they were somehow able to perform this movement. The movement of intentionally taking their Zanpakuto out into the outside world. So when Azashiro Soya was young, he witnessed the killing of all of his family members and saw the death of his sister. His spiritual power came out directly in the form of a Bankai and was embodied in the form of a woman, Uruzakuro, and thus his Zanpakuto directly materialized into the outside world. It's like saying that Azashiro Soya released his Bankai without even learning Shikai. However, the problem that Azashiro Soya got is that he wasn't able to use the Bankai properly. It wasn't a complete Bankai. Because if we return to Yorichi's words, we will find that the process of activating the Bankai requires 2 steps, the first of which is taking the Zanpakuto outside, and the second is subjugating the Zanpakuto. And this is what Azashiro Soya didn't have. That is, it is true that he knew that that woman was the Bankai, but he wasn't able to control her. Uruzakuro would appear and disappear whenever she wanted, and even go to faraway places without Azashiro's approval. For example, 100 years ago, when Azashiro Soya was imprisoned in the Muken, Uruzakuro used to go out and wander around the Sirich. There she met Kisuke and Yorichi when the latter was experimenting his new device, the Tenshintai. So Uruzakuro manifested into that device and began talking to them without any barriers. And so this situation doesn't make you think of someone? She is Yachiru, Zaraki's Bankai. There are almost several similarities between her and Uruzakuro. First, they are both female. Secondly, Yachiru and Uruzakuro were embodied in this feminine image as a result of both Zaraki and Azashiro Soya's attachment to someone. For Zaraki, Yachiru Unohana was an important person in his life, and because of her, he wanted to become a Kenpachi. While Azashiro Soya was very attached to his sister, that is why he wanted to become a Shinigami. In addition to this, Azashiro got his Bankai before the Shikai, while Zaraki, a similar story happened with him. Zaraki stole an Asauchi of a Shinigami, and so he did not enter the Shinigami Academy and took the Asauchi and learned like the rest how to reflect the essence of his soul inside the Asauchi, and thus he will learn the Shikai as well as the Bankai. None of this. Zaraki just stole the Asauchi and kept wandering around the Rekongai. And Zaraki, the young man, considered the Asauchi to be just a sword and nothing else. not carrying any specific power. Therefore, when part of his soul was reflected inside the Asauchi without him realizing it, the Zanpakuto formed over time. The Zanpakuto, which is Nozarashi, was unable to communicate with Zaraki. She kept screaming in her name, but to no avail. Zaraki didn't hear her name. Therefore, throughout centuries, Zaraki literally possessed a Zanpakuto without a name and without the ability to release Shikai, and thus he didn't benefit from the power of his Zanpakuto until we arrived at this event. Just as what happened with Azashiro Soya, a power was formed from his sword in the form of a little girl, which is the Bankai. Because as we said, one of the basics of obtaining a Bankai is the ability to embody your Zanpakuto to the outside. And this is what happened to Zaraki. Somehow, little Yachiru emerged from the sword and became his Bankai. And thus, at that moment, Zaraki had the Bankai without even having Shikai. However, the difference between Azashiro Soya and Zaraki is that Azashiro Soya knew early that Uruzakuro was his Bankai. Unlike Zaraki, he believed that Yachiru was just a lost soul he happened to meet and then became with him. And so throughout the story, Zaraki didn't benefit from the Shikai because he was not able to communicate with Nozarashi. Also because he gave his Bankai a new name, which is Yachiru. She turned into a Shinigami without knowing it. But after Zaraki fought Unohana, he was able to hear his Zanpakuto calling. Zaraki's hearing of his Zanpakuto enabled him to communicate with the Shikai and learn its name. And unfortunately, Kobo didn't reveal how the meeting took place and what exactly happened, because I wished to see Zaraki inside his inner world and Nozarashi appear in her true form as an adult woman. Perhaps then she would have revealed some things related to how she was trying to contact Zaraki and what her relationship with Yachiru. Because this is one of the things that I still don't understand, or that wasn't explained sufficiently to me. Why did Zaraki not know that Yachiru was his Bankai after he communicated with Nozarashi? Because, as I said, one of the basics of using Zanpakuto is communicating with the Zanpakuto and talking to it. And therefore, why did Nozarashi not tell Zaraki that that little girl was his Bankai? What prevented her from doing so? I don't know if Kobo will address this matter one day, but it will still be one of the things that I want to know. Because Zaraki's lack of knowledge that Yachiru was his Bankai was the main reason why he didn't know how to release his Bankai. And soon as Zaraki said Nozarashi's name, Yachiru's Shinigami power disappeared and she returned as it was the first time, a part of Zaraki's Zanpakuto, and that Zaraki is the only one who can see it. Zaraki thought she had gone somewhere, but in reality it returned during the Battle of Girard. Here Yachiru was the one who unleashed her power without Zaraki himself unleashing the Bankai, because he didn't even know Yachiru's true identity, which affected the release of the Bankai, both by the fact that he wasn't able to control himself and also that Yachiru was the one who controlled the amount of power used in the fight. Therefore, I'm certain that there will be a big difference between Zaraki releasing the Bankai himself and what Yachiru did, because pronouncing the name of the technique gives it great power than saying it without a name. So what about giving an entire phase its full name? It is enough to know that Renji was fighting with only half the power of the Bankai, because his Zanpakuto didn't give him the full name of the Bankai. Therefore, this shows the importance of the name, both in terms of pronouncing the awakening of the phase with the word Bankai, and this is something Zaraki didn't have or didn't do, or pronounce the full name of the Bankai, and this is also Zaraki didn't have. So guys, what do you think about Zaraki's Bankai and what could happen if he released it by his own without the need of Yachiru? Tell me in the comments guys, and see you in my next video.